In this chapter, we're going to be painting a landscape together, and we're going to be using a technique which is one of my favourites, which is called wet on wet technique. So, let's get started. All right, so we're ready. We've got our paper in front of us. We're excited. Why I like wet on wet technique is because it gives a lovely, blurry, bleeding finish. And I've chosen to use inks today because they just are the best for spreading through water. Now, I'm going to be creating a landscape from my own memory, and you can follow along with what you see in front of me. When you come to do this a second time, you can do a landscape from your own memory or from a picture or whichever. Let me introduce you to the colours and everything that I have in front of me. We've got my paper here, which is just watercolour paper, and I have taped it to my board. We've got the primary colours, red, blue and yellow, and in addition to those, we've got a black and a white. I've got my palette that's ready for my colours, and the two brushes that we're going to be using today are a 1/4 inch sponge brush and a small round brush. So that's really all you need. I've got 2 jars of water next to me. I always like to have 2 because one gets very dirty and then I can keep one a little bit cleaner. And then finally, we're going to use some paper towel. And it's always great to have this around for spills or what we're going to use it for, which is actually dabbing off some of the inks on our paper. So just always have some of this to the side as well. Let's go through the colours that we're going to be using, and I'm going to show you how to mix just a couple of them to get another colour of each in your palette. So first of all, we've got our red, and these inks usually come with a little dropper, which is very handy, so you can squeeze it. And I like to put in, let's say we're going to put in probably about half of the little palette scoop area, just so we've got enough. That's probably like 5 drops. And then next up, I'm going to put the white, a nice dollop of the white. And I'm going to actually put a little bit of the white in here because I'm going to make another colour. And then next to the white, I'm going to drop in my black, just filling it up about halfway, maybe slightly less. And then my yellow. And I've got a little dropper here for this big one because the big bottles don't normally come with a dropper. You can pick these up at art stores. I'm going to put the yellow in there. I'm going to put another little bit of yellow in this one, about half the amount. So it's about 1/4 full, because that's going to be my green. And then my blue. And I'm going to just put 2 drops into the yellow. And you can change it if it's not the kind of green that you want. You can always add more or less, you know. So I'm going to add in 2 drops of the red and see if it gives me the pink that I want. So mixing that up, that's quite nice. And then make sure to wash your brush off in between mixing your colours so they don't get muddy and murky. And then I'm going to mix what I have here, my green, which is that blue and yellow. That's a nice bright green. There we go. And the last colour that I'm going to make is a dusty sort of bluish grey. And I'm going to do that with 2 drops of blue, 1, 2, a drop of black, 1, and a little bit of white. Let's say 1, 2. Now, I know that those colours make this sort of dusty blue colour, and it takes a bit of time to learn which colours, you know, you mix together to create another colour. I'm going to add a little bit of red because I want it to be a bit of a warmer. There we go. 1 drop of red. There we go. That's more of a purpley blue. Give your brush a nice wash off, and we are ready to start painting. With landscapes, there's something called a rule of thirds, and it's really just a visual thing that you don't have the emphasis right in the middle of your page. So I'm going to create two sections on my piece of paper. There's going to be a larger section at the bottom and then a smaller one at the top. So first of all, dipping in, I'm going to do my first section, which is up the top. And I'm keeping that line nice and straight because that's going to be our horizon line. I'm just leaving the edges kind of rough. I'm not going all the way along. And the reason for that is I just kind of want it to be an unfinished sort of looking section. Next up, I am going to dip into the blue because I'm going to do a sky kind of colour first. Now, I'm using the centre of my palette as my little mixing area. So that's quite a fresh blue. I quite like it. Let's go for a nice bright sort of springtime blue sky. And I'm just going all the way across, and you can sort of dab it in like that if you want. You can see it sort of like pooling a little bit where the water is heavier. And that is just fine. The key to this technique is lots of water. You don't want it to be crazy and slopping off onto the side of your board, spraying out the sides, but you do want it to stay wet for a while. And the reason for that is that we're going to drop other colours into it, and we want the water to be there so that it can spread. So there we go. That's looking quite nice. I like that. I'm going to just put this down, and I'm going to take my paper towel to create some clouds. And the only way to do that is just by dabbing down and pulling it off. And they're quite subtle. You know, if I'd put down a heavier sky, you'd see this more. But because it's quite pale, you're just getting a little indication of a cloud there. But it sort of does the job, doesn't it? There. So that's looking pretty good. So whilst my blue sky is still wet, I'm going to dip into this blue-grey and create what could be mountains or some kind of hill. And the reason that I'm using this kind of colour is because you want something dusty and a little bit towards a purple kind of family, a cool family, because you want it to sit all the way back in the background. And you see how it's spreading? That's fine, we're embracing that. That's not a mistake. That's like, great, it's doing its thing. And that's it. Just did a couple of lines, leave it. Tendency is to keep working on it. And honestly, you don't have to. It's doing it for you now. It's doing cool stuff. It's still spreading. And each colour will sort of spread at a different rate and do its own thing. And you just have to sort of embrace that. So next up, I'm going to just use dipping into my black. And I'm just using the very tip of my brush, just dipping in just a little bit. And I'm going to do some blobs like this that could be tree sort of shapes. Doesn't matter if something like that happens, you get a little drop, don't worry about it. And see how they're doing that lovely, lovely sort of spreading out, looking like leaves and branches from afar. I really want this piece to look like it's something that's sort of hazy and like from memory. And this is the perfect technique for that because you don't get any sharp edges. It's just like soft and subtle and, yeah, a little bit dreamy. All right, so I've cleaned off the black from my brush. And let me think. I think I'm going to do some green leaves, some green trees next. So just dipping into my green and thinking about my tree shapes. Maybe I have some of those lovely tall cypress trees that are sort of long and skinny. And you can go on top of the black too and see what happens, you know. There we go, some nice little green trees. And I'm picking up some of that black too, so it's making a bit of a darker tree. Let's give this is a big guy, big old oak tree. I'm looking forward to putting in these trees. It's going to be the blossom trees. So I'm dipping into this pink. I'm going to go into this space right here. And I'm just dabbing little tiny dabs with my brush. And again, it's moving into that green and creating another new color, which we will embrace. Just little dabs. I'm holding my brush almost vertically, and that just makes life a little bit easier for making those little tiny dot marks, you see? And they all sort of join together, so you can do them quite a long way from the center, and they'll sort of spread and join. So it doesn't all have to be in one area. Let's do one mega blossom that just kind of takes over this top section. Oh, that's nice. So those final little moments with the pink, they are looking great. Washing off my brush real quick, putting it to the side. Now, I'm going to use my black straight from its little pot, and this is just going to be our sort of horizon line. So I'm going to do it just below my wet area. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfectly straight, don't even worry about that. Landscapes aren't always straight. And I'm going to just now do some indications of trunks of trees, or it could be anything. It could be a fence. If I did like a little extra line, maybe it becomes a fence. The beauty of this is that everybody that looks at your artwork, or even you, like you might look at it one day and it looks like one thing, and the next day looks like something completely different. Let's say I wanted to add in a little bit of a rusty color. I've just put the red and the yellow together on my palette to create that little rust color. And I'm just gonna see what happens if I drop that in as well, just for a little bit of something else. Call it a day. I think I'm quite happy with that. So we're gonna let this section completely dry, and then I'm gonna start working on the lower level, which will sort of be the forefront of our painting. So we're back. So let's start on this section. I've actually kept my dirty water to the side here, and the reason for that is sometimes it's nice to lay down water that has a tiny bit of colour so that you can see where it is. It's almost like a pencil drawing. It's very subtle, but it's a little bit different. So I'm just using my dirty water. I wouldn't use your water if it was like really dirty, but just if it has a little bit of a tone to it, it won't affect the colours that you put on top. All right, so I've got my lower half pretty much covered with the rough edges there. And I'm gonna keep my sponge brush in hand, and I'm gonna just lay down a little bit of a sort of a greeny, grass-like indication. I'm gonna make it quite wet. There we go. I'm just brushing that left to right, but you could also just splat it down. Doesn't really matter. And I'm gonna just touch into that dusty blue color just to change up the tone of the green a little bit. So now it's like a bit of a deeper green color. And I'm just adding that in so it's not so flat looking. Now I'm gonna just dip into that browny, rusty color. There we go, that's a nice browny green. I just wanted a little bit more variation happening. And it's still nice and wet. Great. A bit more towards the bluey color again. Let's just see what happens when I do that. You can really have fun with this. Because look how it's already doing cool stuff, and that was just a little splat. So now I'm going to use my brush. And I am dipping into my green, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, because I want the grass up front to be the freshest. So I'm just going to I'm using my brush, almost dangling it between my fingers to get these little scrappy kind of grassy moments. I'm just dragging, I'm letting it sort of just, you know, you could almost just turn your body and do little dashes and see what comes out. The key is to keep your arm nice and loose, because if you get all like this, then you get marks that are a little bit too precise and you start worrying about things. So just try and loosen up your shoulder, turn, look away, see what happens, you know, meh, it'll be fine. It's always going to be fine. I just added in a little bit of our primary blue colour here, and it made it a much darker, more emerald kind of colour. And I'm going to just do that same thing, like loose shoulder, just a few more dashes in a different colour. That's it. And now I'm going to just dab in a couple of tiny marks in the forefront using the flat of the brush to create the shape that is natural to the brush, just by pressing it on the paper. So I've got these little details going on. I think that's quite nice. Now I'm rinsing out that green colour because I'm going to switch over and go to some of these brighter colours here, because I'm going to put in indications of something maybe floral. So I'm going to dip into my pink first, I think. And it's nice to maybe bring some of this pink down so that your eye sort of travels around the painting. You know, we've got it up in the tree, in the blossom, or what could be blossom trees up top. And then it's nice to just have it somewhere else in the painting so that your eye just moves around a little bit, so it's not just focusing on that one area of pink. So I'm just dabbing in. Remember how we did with the blossom? You're just holding your brush sort of vertically and just touching it delicately to the top of the paper. The more pressure you put on, the bigger the blob. So let's see what happens when yeah, it's just going to be bigger. And that's great, actually, because up front, things are going to appear a little bit larger to us. So maybe I want to use that pressure point closer here. No idea what these flowers are. It doesn't matter. Let's say they are some beautiful peonies happening down here, or tulips. So that looks pretty good. Maybe I've got some tiny ones that are just a hint of them. So the tiniest part of my brush is just touching a little bit up in this corner. Maybe there's one random guy over here. He's just solo. Okay, I'm going to wash my brush out and dip into the red. You will notice as your paper dries, the mark will change. So when it's very wet, it expands and goes poof on the paper. And then in these areas that were dry, that didn't get any water, you're going to get a very clean mark. So let me show you here. I'm just using that potato print kind of vibe again. Just pushed it down. You see how I'm able to utilize the shape of my brush, and it's actually making a really nice sort of tulip shape, which is just pure luck, but I'll take it. And as I dab here into the wet areas, we're getting that lovely soft kind of look. And I'm really like not worrying too much at all. I'm just like doing little marks wherever I fancy. Let's have one that's just like really just maybe he's just opened. So I've done my potato print, boop. And then I'm going to add in a little petal and maybe one more. Done. It's always nice to just sort of step back and see if you like the balance of your painting. Does it feel heavy in one place? Can you move colour to another place to kind of balance that out? That's all something that just comes with practice and time. You'll be able to see that better as you practice more. So I'm really happy with how this is looking, actually. And of course, it's going to dry different too. So when all of these colours have completely dried on the paper, they'll look different to how they look now. I guarantee you that yours will look different to mine. And that is because you can only control ink a certain amount. It's gonna do what it wants. That's its characteristic. And that's why every time you try this, it will be different. And there's something really magical about that. That's why I love using this medium, because it's always a surprise. And I never get bored because I just can't tell what's gonna happen. All right, so I think we're at a very good place to stop. And we're gonna let this layer completely dry, take a look at it and see if it needs a few tiny brush marks just to kind of give definition or a little bit more detail. So let's give it 10, 15 minutes to dry naturally and we'll come back and see how it looks. I've been away about 25 minutes and our lovely blurry layer has completely dried now. And it's a good time to just look at your piece and think, do I even need to add anything? Do I want to add anything at all to this? Or do I love it how it is, how it's soft and blurry and all these sort of more abstract moments? I don't think I want to do a lot to this at all. I'm just going to add in a few tiny details in the forefront to some of these flowers. And I'm going to use my round brush for that. So first of all, I'm going to just dip into my red again. And I'm coating my brush, but then I'm dabbing off the excess because you don't want it to be so loaded that it drips, unless that's an intentional look that you want. It's always nice to just dab it off on the edge of your palette there. So I think I'm just going to add in a few more of these more defined shapes. And I can do that now because my paper's dry, which means I'm going to get clean edges to any shape that I lay down. I'm not going to get any more blur because it's completely dry. So I'm just going to pop that in there. I want a slightly bigger one. And I just use my brush to create these little dab shapes. 1, 2, 3. I'm just touching the brush and it's creating that shape for me because it's got that lovely point at the end. 1, 2, 3. Maybe one more. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll use what I've got in the middle here. And you'll find that with these inks, because they're permanent and they have a kind of a binder in them, that once they dry, they kind of form these solid textural little bits can be inside there. And you might want to just get rid of them because they'll end up on your paper. So I'm going to take that off. There's a fine line between when they're still wet and when they're dry, and you can't reactivate them. So once they're completely dry, they sort of set like plastic. You can still wash them out of your palette, but you can't use them to paint with. Popped in some green, a little bit of blue to get that sort of deeper, darker color. And I'm just going to do a few little dashes that could be stems. And again, I'm just sort of loose shoulder, little dashy marks. Don't need many of them. Just wanted to add a few more in. Leave it at that. Washing out my brush. Do I want to add anything else? I think I might just add a few more little speckles of white. I really like how pretty all those little splats look. Now, in this top corner, I wanted to just do an indication of a couple of birds, and I'm using my brush with very little paint on it. So I dipped it. I'm actually going to just take off the excess on my paper towel next to me so that it's not going to go blob right in the middle of the paper. I'm just going to very delicately do a little V shape in different directions. 1, 2, 3 will do. Oh, and 1. I always like a random fella. So he's going to be down there. And I think that looks pretty good. I want to show you the one that I did yesterday, just to sort of test things out. So here's the one we did today. And then next to it here is the one that I did yesterday, just as a little tester. And I just changed my mind a few times, so things look a little bit different. Lots of practicing, lots of trying. Each time will be different, and you can remember which bits that you like the most. You know, I love this area here, and that had a lot of water. I don't know if you remember, I sort of splattered with my foam brush there, and it created more of a texture. Just a really lucky accident. And there's a lot of those when you use ink and water. As you can see from these two paintings, nothing's ever going to be identical. And so embrace that. Have a play, experiment. I can't wait to see what landscapes you come up with.